Today I'm going to show you how to cover a notebook like this with this linen after we do the embroidery onto it. So the notebook that I've chosen is an A5 size. It's about this thick, you can see that, and it has a hard cover. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use the full width of the linen as my book cover, because as it so happens, the sides are going to tuck in like this. There we go. They're going to tuck in like that, and you can see that the width on the inside of the covers is going to be perfect as our book cover. So with that in mind, let's place that back flat on the table. We know that our book has to be positioned somewhere in the middle. The spine has to be somewhere in the middle. Now the way that I'm going to actually mark out where my book is going to sit is going to find that this is approximately the center. Lay it down flat on one side. And you can see I've got about 2 inches on one side. If I flip it to the other side, I've got about 2 inches on the other side as well. I'm leaving a gap down the bottom here because I'm actually going to cut off this hem. It's a bit too thick. I don't want it to be that thick. So the first thing I'm going to do, I know where my book is going to be placed, and I'm just going to take a normal ballpoint pen and draw around the top, the side and the bottom. Now incidentally, before you start, I do recommend that you iron this piece of linen here so that you don't have any crease marks, because we're going to be adding our own crease marks to it shortly. So my book is in position, and I'm going to mark out that bottom line there, then the side. And incidentally, if you haven't worked it out, we are doing this on the reverse, so our embroidery will be going on the other side. Now from this position, you're going to gently turn the book and place it flat on that side, and then add the other lines there, there, and there. Now this is enough for us to mark out where our book is going to lie. You can see that not all of my lines have completely joined up, and what I'm going to do now is just join them up myself. And of course they don't have to be perfect. The beauty about working with fabric is that there is always a little bit of give and a little bit of stretch in it. So even if you don't get everything perfectly aligned, it's not a building. So if we don't have perfectly square corners, it doesn't matter so much. I'm just going to join up these lines, and I hope that you can see that on the video. My room here is very bright, but I can see the line work. There we go. Now, our embroidery is actually going to sit on that side, but in order for us to position it, we have to know where these lines sit on the other side. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create creases along the drawn lines, and then I'm going to actually go off and iron them flat, because that's what's going to give us definition on the reverse side. I'm going to go away and iron these and all of those sides, but I'll just show you in the meantime. You can already see that we've got a crease, and when we turn that over, that crease is quite clearly visible, and we'll be able to position our pattern over the top. Okay, I finished ironing this piece, and I'll just remind you again that I had the line work on the other side that was drawn in pen. It's probably hard to see now because it's inside the crease, and then I folded those over and ironed them flat. You can also see that I've added an iron center line. Now what this does is it gives us a really clear guide on where to place our patterns. I've got my patterns here printed out. So there's the front page, and also the front of the cover and the back of the cover. And as you can see is I've actually created that outline there of the size of an A5 book. Now I've added a little dotted line here because I'm actually going to add a lovely finish with a running stitch around the edges. So I'm just going to cut those out first. There's my first one cut out, and now you can see that it fits really nicely in there. Now what you should also be able to notice now is that our A5 sheet here sits slightly inside the crease lines. Now this is correct because our book cover is also slightly bigger. As you can see, there's a slight lip around the edge. It's the pages that are A5 that are exactly the same. So don't worry if you see that this piece of paper is a little bit smaller than where we've marked it out. Okay, now what I'm going to do is get my masking tape and stick this down to secure it before transferring. Okay, this is what my pattern looks like once it's secured to the fabric. As you can see, I've also secured the fabric to the table before transferring it, and the patterns are secured at the top. We need to be able to lift up the flap so that we can put our carbon paper down if this is the way that you're transferring, and then you can go ahead and transfer that. You can of course obviously also transfer this using the lightbox method. I prefer to use my carbon paper, so I'm going to go ahead and transfer that now, but there's no need for me to show you how to do this because there's actually a separate video on how to do pattern transfers. So we're going to skip now over to the finished embroidery. Okay, there it is. Now you remember our line work from before? There it is around the edges. I've ironed out all of the creases because we don't need those anymore. Here is the embroidery on the front. There's my front part and my back part. And what I'm going to do now, flip this over again, is I'm going to cut this out like we talked about before. I'm going to remove that little lip of a hem there. I don't want that because it's too thick. I'm going to leave both sides as exactly as they are, and then I'm going to add maybe another inch at the top there so that it's the same as at the bottom. Okay, I've finished cutting out my piece, and I've still got this other lovely piece of linen here that I could potentially use. Maybe I could stitch up a small section on here and use it for something else. That will definitely come in handy. All right, we've got our lines marked over here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the creases here so that they match that line work down the bottom, and I'm going to go away and iron those flat. Now what I'm not actually going to do is I'm not going to do a double turnover like this. I'm just going to leave it flat. The reason for that is because as our book wraps around, this is how it's going to wrap around, what I don't want to happen is for this to be too thick in here. So I'm just going to do a single one. If you prefer to do a double, by all means. So as I said, I'm going to go away, iron all these creases flat here and here, and then I'm going to go away and sew this on the sewing machine. Okay, I've just created these creases again. That's to help us actually create the book cover, and as you can see, these are going to be the flaps that are going to hold the cover and the book together. But first, before we go and sew it on the sewing machine, we're just going to actually place everything down to make sure that it all lines up nice and neat. I always have to make adjustments because fabric is obviously quite movable, and quite often you find that maybe there's like a little bit too much on one side or not enough on the other, and we've still got an opportunity to make little fixes if we need to. And I'm just going to wrap this over now. That's looking quite nice, and that crease is actually in the exact position. Don't forget this is going to stretch nicely as well. So we pull that over. Just have a look. It's looking really nice, although what I would say is that there's definitely too much lip on this side. This is going to be okay, I don't mind that, but there's too much on that side, so I'm just going to go back to the iron and fold that over a little bit more. Okay, so I've just fixed up those creases with the iron, and I've wrapped my book up again, and you can see that the creases at the top look pretty good, and these ones at the bottom also look pretty good. You always need a little bit of a lip. Before we go ahead on the sewing machine, I just wanted to show you something that you need to be aware of. So after we've actually finished sewing this cover, the way that that cover of our book is going to slide into this is we're going to have to go in and watch where these little lips are. The corner of the book is going to slide in there, and then the top of that will be sliding in there. That's where it's actually going to be moving into, so that you cannot just sew directly over the top of that, because if you've got a stitch line running about, say, 1/4 inch from the edge, you won't be able to put your book in because there won't be enough space. It's going to be, if our stitch is there, it's going to be hitting that stitch and it won't go in. So we need to leave that entire gap open, which means that our stitch has to run right along the edge there. And the way that we're going to do that is that we're actually going to flip the whole thing inside out, and I'm just going to create short stitches there and on all 4 sides. Let's go and do that so it makes a little bit more sense. Okay, I've finished sewing on the machine, and here is what it actually looks like. It might be a bit confusing for you, but let me just show you. So we had all these creases in here, and then these are the flaps which will essentially pop out like this, right? And the book is going to slide in there. But I just want to show you before I flip them out. The way that I placed this under my sewing machine is that I simply folded these over and then joined the creases. So that crease together with this crease was stitched only from here to there. And I did that on all 4 corners. And now that I've got that done, I'm just going to trim these off a little bit, because this one especially, remember we had to fold it in a little bit more. So there's a bit too much fabric there, which I don't like. So I'm just going to trim that now. Okay, next thing, obviously, we're going to flip this out. And then flip that out. There's our beautiful book cover, and you can see that these are sort of flopping around. What I'm going to do is just quickly run that on the sewing machine, just from there to there, and again from there to there. And then before I actually put the book cover on, I'm also going to do that beautiful running stitch along the edge. And there we have it. It is completely finished. I've stitched it on the sewing machine there and there, and then I also added a beautiful running stitch. I really love the way that this has turned out. Now when you do your running stitch, what I actually did is I pulled my thread to the full length of the entire perimeter, plus a little bit more on the end. And then what I did is I actually started under here so that the knots are hidden, started under there, and then stitched all the way around, making sure obviously that you're not stitching those 2 parts together, so your thread is just going to be coming in and out of the surface. And there we go. Let's see how good it looks. There's my little book. Not sure yet what I'm going to use it for. Thinking about my Spanish lessons. I'm learning Spanish, so maybe this will be my phrase book for all my Spanish words and sentences. It looks really good. Oh my god, I love it. I'm also wondering whether I should embroider some words onto it, which is another thing that I really enjoy doing. Maybe my initials at the top there, or perhaps even something stitched in on the side. We'll see. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope that it all made sense.